Hi everyone, this is David Collins back from Ann Arbor Guitars in our fifth video in the series on the volume and tone control electronics in your guitar. In this episode we're going to start looking at a wiring scheme often referred to as 50's wiring because Gibson wired their volume and tone this way in the 1950s. What this is output loading versus coil loading. You remember in our first video we talked about what loading was. That is spanning across the two ends of the signal with a resistor, which loads it, which affects its frequency response. Now, coil versus output loading doesn't have any effect until you start to turn the volume control down. You can see with the volume on 10, the output and the coil are directly connected. And so we can switch between output and coil loading, and aside from the slight blips you might see on the spectrum analyzer from the switch clicking, there's no change. As we start to roll the volume control back, however, when we switch to the output loading or 50's wiring, we're actually disengaging we're adding resistance to the tone pot. We're separating it even further from the coil by greater resistance, so we're lessening the load across the coil. This has a similar effect to the treble bleed of boosting the overall treble response coming from the coils. And you can see it's subtle, but it's certainly there. Output loading, we get that resonant peak further up the spectrum and further up in amplitude, giving us a little bit of high boost there as we roll the volume back to counter whatever might be lost in loading the amplifier input. Roll it down even further, you can see the same effect still follows. Where things start to get a little bit more complicated, however, is when you roll the tone and the volume back together. Just for the sake of clarity, we're going to roll the tone all the way down here and start to roll the volume back with coil loading or modern wiring. And you can see our frequency response delivered from the pickup stays relatively consistent. When we switch to output loading, however, we are introducing new resistance in series with the capacitor, between the coil and the capacitor. And so it's actually the equivalent of turning the tone control back up as far as the pickup sees it. So turn that back on, and you can see with the output loading, we actually, as we turn the volume down, we start to get a rather significant treble boost. It's as though we're turning the control back up as we're turning the volume down. Now this can work fine for a lot of players. If you don't roll your tone control back very much, it's really a non-issue. But if you do, it's something to be aware of, that with your tone control rolled back, as you roll back the volume, you will actually get brighter. Let's go ahead and plug it in and give it a listen, see what difference it makes. Now with the 50's versus modern or output versus coil loading, let's go with 500K pots and series for the bridge pickup here. Of course there's no difference at all on 10 because the output and the coil are one and the same. But as we start to turn down, it's a very subtle change. It's not nearly as prominent and outspoken as the traditional treble bleed circuit. But it's still there, no doubt. But where it really starts to get interesting is if we have both of them rolled back together. Let's roll our tone back to, we're at about 3 right now. And roll our volume down with a standard modern wiring, the coil loading, and we keep that low muddy tone there. Switch to the 50's or output loading, however, and we actually get brighter. Two things happen actually. We get notably brighter as we turn down, and the bass roll-off is even more exaggerated at the high end if you're using audio pots. Watch this. That's really between 10 and 8. And all that that's happening compared with the coil loading, where we're not losing the overall lower end of the signal quite as quickly. So as you can see, it's a much more interactive. Some people love it, some people don't. This can be used to someone's advantage if they want to turn the tone down a little bit or a lot when they are in some kind of a lead mode. And want that really quick cleanup as they roll back from 10 to 7. And it's even quicker with the 50's wiring because of the way it really cuts down that lower end of the signal. That's 50's or output loading compared to standard coil loading today, where we keep the tone control settings as we roll the volume back. 50's, the tone control settings are almost wiped out and the roll off is much quicker. So depending on how you want to use it, that can be perfect for you. That is a very useful tool if it's the kind of style you're going to play in. So as you can see, the 50's wiring is another approach that has the effect of boosting the treble slightly to help counter the loss we typically find as we roll the volume down. And it interacts much more with the volume and tone than the typical treble bleed circuit does. That one is fairly isolated to the volume. The output loading of the tone, or 50's wiring, completely changes the dynamics of how the volume and tone controls work together if you happen to be using both at the same time. Please tune in for our next video, and we're going to start splitting the volumes up and looking at independent versus master wiring when using two volumes for two different pickups. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.